Chapter 9. Colt set me down on the soft ground beneath the pines. It was blessedly cool. And for a moment I just lay there, pain racking my body. It was too strong for me to fight, even if I wanted to. Something was changing inside me. Not just my body, but something deep inside my core. I wanted this, I wanted to change. I was afraid of the pain, but the desire to be a wolf was growing stronger than the fear. Colt. I tried to sit up, but I could only make it to my hands and knees. Stayed there, head down, gulping in the night air. Jericho. We're here, Red. Right here. We're not leaving you. Will you change with me? We will. I looked up at Jericho, Colt standing behind him. Promise. Red, we wouldn't miss this for all the world. We'll be right there beside you every step. Some kind of seismic wave of pain took my breath away. I arched up onto my knees, head back, screaming my pain into the night sky. The sound went from human to wolf, and this time stayed there. Jericho said something, Colt answered, but their voices were muddy, muffled, words making no sense. My hands hurt, the tips of my fingers felt like someone was cutting them open with knives. I made the mistake of looking down. My nails were splitting, the ends of my fingers widening, shortening, pulling back into my palms. Claws emerged, thick, sharp, wicked looking. I wanted to scream, but frankly I was mesmerized. Thick hair appeared, reddish blonde, and within minutes my hands, my feet were covered. It moved up my arms and legs, and I looked down at my body. I was completely covered. There was more pain, more changes. My jaw cracked, stretching. It was agony, and I threw my hands up to my face, scratching my skin with my claws. The pain was nothing compared to the torture in the rest of my body. I tried to lower my arms, but they refused to cooperate, and I fell forward onto my newly formed paws. I wanted this to end, to be whatever I was supposed to be. There was another burst of noise in my head, the roar deafening now. Someone touched me, and I turned, snarling, snapping my jaws and my very sharp new teeth at the hand on my shoulder. It was Colt. She's one of us. The roaring was gone. I could hear everything, see everything, smell things I could not identify. I was a wolf. Something pushed at my other shoulder. I turned, teeth bared. It was a yellow wolf. It was Jericho. It's okay. I shook my head. It sounded for a minute like radio static or bees buzzing. But then the noises cleared. The voice was his, in my mind, and he was there, standing next to me, a wolf. Think it, and you can talk to me. You'll have to work at it. I wanted to tell him I was okay, or at least that I thought I was okay. But it was like being in a dream where you want to scream, but it's all muffled. Like screaming into a pillow. A brief sharp pain lanced through my head, and I whined in protest. It's okay. Just take it slow. You can understand me, right? Just wag your tail. Even as a wolf he could make me smile. If wolves could smile and wag my tail, right? But there was something behind me, something I could control. Glanced over my shoulder. I did have a tail, a big lush tail, blonde tipped and red. An experimental wiggle of my back end brought a yip from my left. Wag your tail, not wiggle your ass. As much as I liked that ass. I spun around. The big black wolf I'd seen on the trail in the park was sitting, head cocked, watching me with bright blue eyes. Colt. I snapped at him. You can wag your tail however you want. It was Jericho again, clearer this time. Screw you. Colt and Jericho barked what I assume was wolfish laughter. Good job, Red. You got it. Leave it to Colt to make you mad enough to talk. You feel like taking a walk in the woods? Jericho wagged his tail and turned. Follow the leader. I took a few experimental steps. For legs and a tail on a woman who had a hard time walking and chewing gum at the same time. But one step led to another, and within minutes I was loping down the path behind Jericho. Colt followed. I could hear him, every footfall on the pine needles. Clear and sharp. I could smell him too. And Jericho. Their scent was even more intoxicating, like this, mixed with trees and foliage and decaying leaves. Hit me like a physical blow someplace near my heart. These were my wolves. The path I'd walked on before was suddenly full of things I'd never seen or even knew existed. Everything was interesting. I heard something in the leaves and couldn't help pouncing on it. Turned out it was a shrew. I caught it, tossed it in the air. Then I backed away, my mouth filled with something that tasted horrible. Jericho's laugh echoed in my head. You'll learn what's edible, what's not. Those are not. I headed off the path, deeper into the forest. The guys flanked me, never pushing too close but always there. I snuffled through leaves, listened to earthworms burrowing, beetles moving invisibly under cover. All of it was fascinating. I moved through a clearing, a space beneath the pines. I stopped, taking it all in. It was like a cathedral, a sacred space, almost an hour. Backyard. I wanted to come here again as myself, or as my other self. Come on. You'll love the river. Colt veered off, heading down the ravine. I'd never been here, couldn't have ever walked here. It was steep and rocky, but I worked my way easily between boulders and fallen logs. If nothing else, I loved being graceful and sure-footed. The river shimmered in the dark, the surface giving off colors I never even knew existed, sounds I'd never heard with my human ears. I stood open mouthed with what I thought was probably a wolf-like grin on my face. Beautiful, right? Colt brushed against my shoulder, a bold move since I'd tried to bite him earlier, but the desire to snap had faded. Maybe I was getting used to being in this new skin. Yeah, beyond beautiful. More fun to play in. Come on. Colt nudged me with his nose, pushing me forward, but I didn't need any prodding. Race you. But I was already sprinting toward the river. I looked over my shoulder, my two wolves right behind me. I ran into the water. It was cold on my paws, but it ran off my fur. The rocks beneath me were slippery, but I clambered over them with ease. Water hit my muzzle and I turned. Colt jumped from a nearby rock, water splashing over me. I barked. I think it was something like a bark. It was a sound of perfect joy. We played in the water for a long time, jumping, splashing each other, veering off to turn over a rock in search of something hidden beneath them. Discovered a crayfish, nosing it with interest, until it clamped one claw on the end of my nose. I pulled back, snorting, shaking my head until it came loose, sailing through the air. I heard it hit the water with a little plunk. Colt crossed the river, and Jericho and I joined him. We started up the other side into the park. It was the first time I'd been here since I'd met Colt and Jericho at the hot springs. It seemed a lifetime away now. We skirted the campsites. The scent of burning wood was acrid, foreign, made me sneeze. Underneath that was the tantalizing smell of food. I lifted my head, sniffing the air, salivating. It was irresistible, and I turned, following the aroma. Jericho cut me off, a low growl rippling from his throat. I stopped. Colt stepped up on the other side. No. A single word spoken by both. My hackles rose. I wanted what I wanted. We can't risk being seen. I heard the words, let the meaning sink. I backed down, stepped away. It was hard, but I turned toward the river. The guys followed, and we went. Chapter 11. The sun was just coming up over the top of Black Wolf on the other side of the river, setting the trees on the other ridge alight. The leaves had changed. Almost overnight. Fall was here. There was a tang in the air, crispness like biting into an apple. I'd never been a fan of autumn. It had always seemed to me things ended in the fall. The garden my father had loved to potter around in on weekends was giving up its last tomatoes, the flowers fading, setting seed. And when I was a kid, it also meant back to school, the end of the summer. Fall always made me sad. But this year was different. It was a beginning. My heart did that thing I'd only read about in overwritten romance novels. It swelled with emotion. I'd never felt it before, and it took me a minute to realize what it was that I liked, how it felt that I was comfortable with so many new emotions. And I realized something else. For the first time in a long, long time, I was truly happy. I wasn't really thrilled about being awake this early, though. I was more accustomed to going to bed at this time. But my schedule and the rest of the worlds had rarely meshed. And now it was even more obvious living here with my wolves. Jericho and Colt were sound asleep. I wanted to leave early, get done what I needed to do, and be back before dark. Some of my errands were purely chores. Getting the last of my things out of my apartment. Maggie had called, and the couple subletting my apartment wanted to move in a week early, willing to pay extra for most of the furniture that I no longer needed. What was left wasn't much, but it was all personal books and journals. Photos of my dad, the bear, essentials, sentimental and otherwise. My clothes I brought up over a couple weekends. Everything else remaining with the sublet. And that included the artwork Harrison never liked. Colt and Jericho had made the transition into my new life with them a little easier. For one, they cleared the path down the mountain so I wasn't continually being hit in the face with branches and underbrush. They'd hacked out a parking space for my car too so I could pull off the logging road that led back to the main road. I headed down the path. It felt really strange to be awake in the daylight. Seemed far brighter than I remembered for this time of the year. The shifter in me dug through my purse fishing out sunglasses. The guys had told me there were things that took some getting used to, and I suppose this was one of them. The car was covered in leaves and pine needles, pretty well camouflaged against the undergrowth behind it. I brushed off the windshield, unlocked the car and got in. This was the first time I'd started it up in weeks. I crossed my fingers. It seemed to me that my dad had told me cars needed to run on a regular basis or they stopped working. I turned the key and the engine purred. Smiling, I managed to turn the car around on the narrow road, heading back toward the city. It was a very surreal experience speeding down the interstate. The fastest I'd moved lately had been at a sprint through the forest as a wolf, piloting a car at the limit, even though I'd done it thousands of times before my new life. I took the exit to my street, slowing down as my apartment came into view. Maggie's car was at the curb. My heart did a little jump at the thought of seeing her. I missed her more than I thought possible. We'd blithely assumed phone calls and text message would be enough. But the service in the mountains was a fickle mistress, and even though I could get a bar or two if I walked out to the edge of the clearing below the cabin, it wasn't reliable. Colt had been amazed there was any signal at all. Not that either he or Jericho had cell phones or computers. The light was out in the hallway like it always was. That was something I wouldn't miss. Conversations more like arguments with the super trying to get him to replace the bulb. No longer my problem. I took the stairs 2 at a time, since I'd started shifting on a regular basis and gotten over the whole being exhausted every time. I'd had more energy than ever. Back in my old life these stairs had seemed insurmountable. Now they were a piece of cake. Risha. The door to my apartment was open. Maggie leaning out into the hall. You made good time. I did. She pulled me into a big hug and I squeezed her back. She squeaked out a little sound and I backed off, forgetting for a minute she wasn't a wolf like me. You go away and turn into some muscle woman. You've lost weight. Don't those guys feed you? She dragged me into the apartment before I could pick a question to answer. There was food on the counter, bagels and cream cheese, fruit juice and coffee. Are you expecting company? I poured a cup of coffee and took a sip. Maggie stood, hands on hips, watching. Only you. All your favorites. And since when do you drink your coffee black? She nodded at the cream and sugar sitting on the counter. You're a sugar maven. Have been from the first cup you ever had. Guess my tastes have changed. How much else had changed? And how much of those changes could I talk to Maggie about? Well, even if you've given up cream and sugar, it's still great to see you. Maggie perched on one of the kitchen counter stools. I'd had them in storage. Harrison thought they were great. I tended to fall off of them during dinner. Maggie had brought them back out in her attempt to stage the apartment when she'd helped me find a sublet. Thanks for finding. What's their names? I took another sip of coffee. I really appreciate all your help. They're the Spaldings. Dina and David. Sounds like high school. Sweethearts our age, married for ages. Fell in love with the apartment as is. Down to the art on the walls. Maggie slid an envelope across the counter. Here's all their contact information, the signed agreement, and a copy of the lease. You're lucky there are only a couple months left on the lease. The Spaldings are looking to stay after the sublet is up, so hopefully that works out and they don't stiff you on the rent for the next couple months. I trust your judgment. You're pretty good at reading people. I spread a generous layer of cream cheese on a bagel. My stomach had been growling for the last half hour. I took a bite, but something was wrong. I love cream cheese and onion bagels. It tasted off wrong. I set the bagel aside. Not hungry. I ate before I left. I hated lying to Maggie, but there was no way I could tell her what I suspected, that the wolf in me wasn't a big fan of dairy. You okay? I glanced up at Maggie. She could read me like a book, knew me better than anyone. Well, except for Jericho and Colt. Yeah, just tired from the ride. But I could read her too, and I knew she wasn't buying it. Risha, come clean. What is it? Is it the guys? That little line appeared between her brows, the one that told me she was worried. I hated seeing it. No, yes. Sort of. But it's not what you think. It's nothing bad. I wasn't sure what to call it, how to tell her I wasn't the same person she thought I was. I've made some changes in my life, Maggie. Some really major changes. That's pretty obvious. You went away to clear your head and you ended up moving in with 2 guys. That's a pretty major change, especially for unconventional you. She gave me a smile, but the worry was still there in her eyes. Are you telling me there's more? It's a different kind of life, Maggie. Radically different. Pushed up the sleeves of my sweater, propping my chin up in my hands. I'm not sure I can explain it. Maggie reached out, touching my arm. Is there something you're not telling me? Yeah, there is. No. You're scratched and bruised. Her eyes were locked on my arms. I looked down, then pulled down my sleeves. Risha, are they doing that? Oh no. God no. Jericho and Colt would never hurt me. We do live in the wilderness, you know. Lots of hiking, bushwhacking, lots of me falling down. These are just sort of a daily occurrence. She still wasn't buying it. I reached out and squeezed her hand. Listen. Come. Up to the cabin. I want you to meet them and them to meet you. You're the most important person in my life. I want you to see that I'm okay up there. Really okay. After a minute she squeezed my hand. Okay. Deal. Before it snows I'll come up and meet your guys. She giggled. I still can't believe you ended up living with 2 guys. It's just so crazy. I winked. It is. But it's right for me. I was going to say sexy, but if you want to stick with crazy, that works. 2. Chapter 12. My last stop was the gym. There was nothing there for me to get, but I wanted to say goodbye to Jack. I felt like I owed him something, an explanation or thank you. He'd been in my life for only a short time, but it was his voice I heard most often. Could be that he reminded me of an older version of my dad. Or it could be he didn't take any of my shit, and I appreciated that. Hey Red. About time you show up. You missed some sessions. I leaned on the counter watching the guys in the ring. Jack came around. Stood next to me. Yeah. About that. I need to cancel the rest of my contract. I'm moving. He looked down at me, and I swear the air between us changed. I thought he was going to yell or give me the silent treatment. But after a moment he broke into a smile. I had to admit it was the first time I'd ever seen Jack smile. He leaned forward and I tensed, expecting a smack to the back of my head. But instead he kissed my cheek. I wasn't sure which startled me more, the smile or the unexpected show of something resembling affection. About time you found your pack, Red, whoever they are. You'll fit in just fine. He stepped back. I stared. Had I just heard him say what I thought he'd said? You heard me. I stared harder. A ripple of energy rushing through my body, and I felt goosebumps crop up on my arms. I'd heard his words, but I swear his lips hadn't moved. He simply smiled and walked back behind the counter. Just let me get the cancellation form, and you're good to go. He shuffled papers. I watched, stunned, a million questions on the tip of my tongue, but I knew I couldn't ask them. I signed the form he pushed at me. Forwarding address? You might have a refund coming. I shook my head. Not really. I didn't think our road even had a name. Off the grid. I understand. Here. I scribbled Maggie's address. My friend. She'll see that I get it. He glanced at the paper. Works for me. Listen, Red. You take care of yourself. It's a different life, but if there's ever been anyone who can handle it, it's you. You're one of the toughest broads I've ever had the pleasure of working with. Someone in the ring called Jack's name. He nodded. I got a client waiting. Take care, Red. He smiled at me again, and then he was gone. I was back at the cabin just before sunset, which made the walk up the trail much easier. The boxes from my old apartment could wait until tomorrow, until Colt and Jericho could help me. My guys, my wolves. Even though I'd only been gone 12 hours, I missed them terribly. Missed their scent, the way they moved, looked, the way they looked at me, touched me. I was smiling long before I saw the cabin, before I saw Jericho and Colt sitting on the porch. They came down the stairs and I got the biggest bear hug, or I guess wolf hug would be the proper term. Whichever, it was just what I needed. Glad you're back. We missed you. Colt kissed me on one cheek, Jericho the other. The kisses might have been chaste, but their hands were making it clear they had something a lot less innocent in mind, and that suited me just fine. I missed you guys too. Where's your stuff? Do you want to bring it up? We cleared room in the loft. Boxes can wait. I pulled Colt close, kissing him hard, a big wet kiss with plenty of tongue. Before he could say anything, I did the same to Jericho, tugging his bottom lip, putting just enough pressure on him to remind him I'd bitten him before. But I can't. Whatever you want, Red. Inside or out? Colt spun me away from Jericho, pulling me into his arms. Out. And I know a place. I pushed away from Colt, skipping out of his grasp. I ran around the cabin, following the trail we'd taken the first night. I shifted. I wanted to be in that space with them. Colt caught me easily, grabbing me around the waist. I was laughing as he pulled me down onto the soft pine needles that carpeted the ground. Smelled cool and fresh, like Christmas warmed by the sun. I rolled onto my back, looking up at Colt, backed by the clear indigo of the coming twilight. Your eyes look silver at night, did you know that? And your eyes shine like diamonds. Isn't she the most beautiful thing in the world? Jericho dropped down onto the ground beside us. You're a beautiful woman, and you make a beautiful wolf. My face went hot. You're making me blush. And it makes you all the prettier. Did we come out here to talk? Or did we come out here for something else? Turned out we were there for something else. I let the guys take the lead, my wolf content to bask in the attention and the love. It was darker, but I could still see if I wanted to, if I kept my eyes open. But I closed them, seeing them in my mind's eye as they worshipped my body. They took turns moving over me, nuzzling and kissing, sucking my breasts, until my nipples were hard and aching. I arched against them, winding my fingers in their hair, holding them against me. Jericho broke away, moving slowly down my body, leaving a trail of fire on my skin with his kisses, his tongue, his sharp teeth brushing against the edge of my navel. He moved lower, and I gasped as those lips and tongue and sharp teeth brushed against something else, something far more sensitive. Hands spread my legs, but I was already letting them fall open. Fingers caressed the soft skin of the insides of my thighs, playing over my heated flesh. I grabbed at the pine needles beneath me, crushing them, the smell of pine filling the air. I wanted those fingers to move higher, to touch me at my core. But they only teased me, only fanned the fire they'd started. I could have begged them silently, just with my mind. I didn't. I let them play. A kiss softer than a butterfly's wing touched me, and I drew in a sharp breath. The kiss was followed by another, lips firmer, pressing against me. Then the flick of a tongue at the edge, closer. But not there yet. The other stayed at my breast, sucking, stroking gently in time with the kisses between my legs. I shuddered slowly, my breathing unable to slow my heart. It bounded and leapt in time with the touch of the man between my thighs, with the one at my breast. And then there was more kisses, becoming deeper, the flick of a tongue, circling, testing, then suddenly plundering, probing, delving deeply into me. I sighed as pressed against the ground, fingers wound through thick hair, deeper and harder, licking and sucking at me until I couldn't stand it. Arched violently, digging my fingers into the earth, but didn't cry out, didn't scream my ecstasy to the sky. I kept it inside, kept the power contained, turning it inward. My wolf danced with me in sheer joy, feeling everything I did, loving every second of my pleasure. She wasn't controlled or contained, held back or held down. All was as it should be. I opened my eyes, watching the stars overhead, turning on the great wheel in the sky. I touched that wheel thanks to Colt and Jericho. I smiled, and my wolf did as well. She and I were one.